Today I'd like to talk about the subject of trance. What exactly is trance? How does that relate to meditation, to hypnotherapy, or even to just relaxation states that we might find ourselves into? And what's done in trance? How can we use that to work on ourselves to effect a kind of emotional release and fulfillment, which is the overall subject of this particular show that we're doing. Over the years, in working with myself and also in working with clients in my therapy practice, I've evolved a technique or a format which does involve working with trance. But I didn't think of it in those terms originally. I thought of it just as working in a meditative state, because I was basing my approach to working with clients on what I had discovered within myself working in a meditative state. Working with clients led to bringing them into a meditative state while in the therapy session, and then being able to evoke and work with feelings that were coming up in that state. And that's, just to summarize again, what our main approach to self-therapy or working on ourselves is. It's always coming back to an emotional base. For me, working with feelings is the most important part, and things like reprogramming ourselves to do better, I feel, can even be a detriment to a really important spiritual and evolutionary kind of work on ourselves. Working with feelings is most important, releasing feelings is most important, and in order to do that, I developed the approach of working in trance. But what exactly is trance, and how does it relate to these different disciplines? The notion of hypnosis, the notion of trance, the notion of meditation are basically all the same thing. What they all involve is what can be scientifically defined as coming into an alpha state of consciousness. Alpha refers to the rate of speed of the brain waves. And as they slow down from normal activity, we go into an alpha state, and then beyond that we even go into slower states which start to approach sleep. But in alpha, we're not exactly in our normal waking consciousness. We're very relaxed, and the alpha state is also characterized by a relaxation of the mental thinking processes. Normally when we're in our waking consciousness, the mind is in control. The mind is directing us through activity, making decisions, making plans, doing all these different tasks that we do in a normal, ordinary life, directed by our mind. When we go into alpha, into a trance state, the mind activity relaxes. That condition is what's used in both hypnosis and meditation and relaxation work in general. Now, if you were to go to a hypnotherapist, you would experience a relaxation induction, and I'm sure you've heard of how these inductions have been characterized through the years of either watching with your eyes fixated on a moving pencil or a pendulum, or counting down, or visualizing yourself counting, walking down a staircase, going deeper and deeper, and the hypnotherapist or hypnotist's voice will keep suggesting that you're going into a deeper relaxation. Actually, what they say quite often is that you're going into a state of sleep, which I believe is inaccurate, because they're not really trying to produce sleep, they're really trying to produce just a greater relaxation. But it's that tendency to slow you down, to bring you out of normal waking consciousness into the alpha state. And in meditation, the same thing is done, basically. Many times in meditation, for example, if you were practicing TM, Transcendental Meditation, do that by repeating a mantra, a very simple, usually one-syllable word, over and over again, which has the same kind of hypnotic effect. The repetition of that word tends to dull out the conscious mind. So the conscious mind relaxes, and then our being, our consciousness, is able to slip down to a more relaxed alpha state. Now, the big difference between what's done in hypnosis and hypnotherapy and what's done in meditation and in counseling, as I do it, using trance states, is that usually in hypnosis, the purpose of entering an alpha altered state consciousness is to make suggestions regarding behavioral changes. A client, for example, may want to lose weight, may want to stop smoking, may want to be able to get rid of some kind of anxiety or change some kind of behavior. So hypnotherapy puts you in the state, makes suggestions that you've lost your appetite for food, you no longer crave cigarettes, and so on. And the theory behind this is that it's been observed that in alpha state, we are exposing ourselves in a kind of vulnerable way to suggestion. The mind, which is normally the censor, which is watching what kinds of thoughts are entering into the consciousness and are able to proceed deeply into the unconsciousness, the mind is no longer acting as that guardian or censor. So suggestions are able to come in and take hold. And this has basically just been observed. We still don't really know exactly why it works like this, why we are so suggestible. But we know that that's the case. So if someone is relaxed, if the mind is relaxed, suggestions can come in. And another interesting characteristic of the relaxed subconscious condition is that the subconscious cannot really distinguish between reality and fantasy, so that you can imagine something in your mind when you're in a trance state, and that has the same kind of impact as if the event was actually happening. So many times, for example, athletes will use this principle in conditioning themselves for performance. They visualize themselves winning. They visualize themselves doing the particular activity to maximize their skill and performance. And this kind of practice within the mind is seen by the subconscious as the same kind of training result that would happen as if the person was actually going through the activity. But hypnosis takes you to the point where it wants to change behavior, so it makes suggestions to directly change your behavioral direction. Now, what I tried to introduce in the workshop that I presented at the convention a few weeks ago was the fact that, for me, much of our motivation is based on emotion. We have what I've called suppressed emotions, and these suppressed emotions are being held in our subconscious, but they're always coming up. We're always aware of these feelings, especially the negative feelings like loneliness or anger. We can see within ourselves that these feelings surge up from the subconscious into our consciousness, and we have to deal with them somehow. Now, in many cases, behavior such as smoking or the reasons that we can't lose weight, the behavior that we resort to that behavior as a management technique to manage our feelings. And this is something that we often don't realize. But, for example, if we're experiencing a lot of anxiety, it's very easy to turn to food or even to alcohol or to sex or to any kind of other stimulating activity that we become addicted to in order to squash the anxiety. So if we're simply trying to change our habit of smoking by making different suggestions about that activity, we're not really doing anything to eliminate the cause which is behind the activity of smoking, namely the emotions, the anxiety, the fear, all the negative feelings. These feelings, when we do something like smoke, overeat, indulge in all these suppressing activities. These activities keep the emotions more or less in control, even though they're not resolved. Working with feelings directly, I also do in trance, but the big difference between the way I work and the way someone would work as a hypnotherapist would be that I don't use any positive suggestions in order to try to change behavior as a primary goal. The way I work is to go to trance, work with the feelings, integrate and allow the feelings to release in trance, and then releasing the feelings means that there's no longer any need to act compulsively, to smoke, drink, act out, and do any kind of negative, destructive behavior that we use to control feelings. So that's the big difference. I don't believe in using positive behavioral suggestions too often. Maybe sometimes at the end of a session where there's been an emotional release and where there's actually a space where the emotion has been cleared from, there is a need to put in a positive affirmation, a positive suggestion in that space, which I do with clients. But primarily what we're doing is working on feelings in trance state. And why is trance state so good to work with feelings? It's because it's for the same reason, basically, that as we go into trance, the mind slows down, stops, and the mind is usually the seat of what I call self-rejecting behavior. And when I say that, I'm referring to self-rejecting on an emotional level. What we're doing is pushing away our feelings, rejecting our feelings, which are a very important part of ourself, through these various forms of behavior, which are really just activities of the mind. So when the mind slows down, as in trance state, then what happens is that we start to access those feelings that are right behind the mind. And this happens in meditation too. And it's very important to realize, especially if you're meditating as a spiritual practice, or even, let's not get so formal about it, let's just say, if you sit down and if you're sitting quietly, just sitting quietly and relaxing the activity of the mind allows the feelings that are being held back to come forward. And so if we think that we're going to relax, we sit down and we might experience more anxiety. We have to recognize that what's happening is that the feelings that have previously been held in the subconscious are now coming forward in order to get released. But the way to really release the feeling is to go into a relaxed state, as I've been describing, and then to begin to just open to the feeling, let it come into your consciousness, which is what we normally never do because we keep pushing the feeling away. And the clearing of the feeling can occur, and usually it occurs in bits and pieces over a period of time. Once you start working with a certain feeling, the release of the feeling occurs just by allowing it to come into consciousness, into a very gentle place, and establishing a sense of safety to begin with, and then a sense of opening into what I call witness consciousness. And then from that point of view, from the witness consciousness, being able to go into and open to a feeling.